All right, good. All right, it looks like it's on. So this is great. All right, so I am Liz Kent. I'm the leader of the Dayton Catholic Land Movement chapter, and I thought it would be really appropriate to bring Mike Giudici on, who is the executive director of the Catholic Land Movement. I was very blessed to get to know Mike about a year ago as I joined up the ranks, being a chapter leader. And his story is amazing. He's done so many different things. He's like the perfect guy to lead this amazing organization. I'm sure he'll get into the phenomenal growth that it has been experiencing and that he's been a huge part in. So, Mike, I'm excited to have you. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about your background. But before we do that, would you be willing to lead us in a little prayer?
Absolutely. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady, wrap this conversation in your protective mantle and have the work that we do be pleasing to your Son. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. So before we get into the nitty gritty about the goings on in the Catholic Land Movement, tell us a little bit about your background and especially what got you started in this movement, which, for many decades was just not really existent in the world. And then all of a sudden, out of New York State, it comes about.
Yeah. So I was born a cradle Catholic, but my cradle Catholicism, it wasn't a very, it was cultural. Many people who grew up as an Italian on Long Island and maybe in other places might resonate with the idea that our Catholicism in my family was part of our cultural habit, but it wasn't part of or deeply part of our home life or intellectual life or spiritual life. We were kind of like Christmas and Easter. And you get baptized and, you do your confirmation because it makes grandma happy. And so that was kind of, that was my upbringing in the faith, not particularly strong. And I did a lot of different things. As you kind of said, I have had a somewhat interesting career path. I was a school teacher, paramedic, small business, worked in politics for a little while, did a grassroots organizing, all kinds of stuff. And eventually, my wife and I, through the course of a handful of business successes, we ended up in a small farm in upstate New York. And it afforded me the time to kind of garden all day and plant trees all day and take care of animals all day. And we ended up growing a ton of our food. And more and more and more, we're hey, let's just live a simple life. So we kind of disengaged from constant, drumming of media, and we disengaged from in industrialized food chains, and we grew our food and lived outside, had a bunch of kids. And this experience, what emerged for me was a deep sense of reverence that I wanted to complement with prayer. And I really didn't have a reference for that all that much. And I only really knew the prayer that my grandma taught me when I was a kid. So, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou. So I would be planting trees and gardening and just saying the Hail Mary over and over and over again. In fact, sometimes singing it, right? But I don't think I would have considered this maybe 10 years ago, that's 13 years ago. I wouldn't have considered myself Catholic. I mean, culturally, but I wasn't oh yeah, I'm a Catholic. I was no sacramental life, no, just but meanwhile, planting trees all day and singing the Hail Mary. That kind of grew into a series of kind of awakenings in my life that led me eventually to a restoration of sacramental Catholicism for my family, and then kind of a pursuit and a deepening of my liturgical life and prayer life, a deepening of understanding the doctrines of the church, particularly the social doctrines. And I just became enamored with the faith, and this love for Christ and the church that he left us really grew in me. And so that took a process of unfolding, and it is continued. I'm reverted now, and we've been Catholics for a while. and it, like attending the same mass, I think now for like 6 years, in where we're at. And but I'm still converting, if that makes sense. Like that process of conversion is totally not over at all. And so
I
yeah,
think
so
that's
that's
lifelong for all of us.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
It's kind of astounding the more you get into it. And so in that at one point maybe 6 years ago, I think, I started to really be interested in why this was happening to me, and what's the link between agrarianism and Catholicism? And I started to read. I've been a voracious reader my whole life, and I came across this book, which is Fleet of the Fields by IHS Press, which is a collection of letters and essays of the original Catholic land movement from the 1920s and 30s in England. And through this book, which is essays on community and the family, and training for the land, and all the different kind of intellectual foundations and principles that animate the land movement, essays, letters. Through that book, I realized that there's this rich history of Catholic agrarianism, and my experience was not so unique, and that beyond my own experience, there was a rubric for social action around organizing people, and it didn't need to be reinvented. Like, it was there. History had it. It was held. It was actually pretty well documented. And quickly my mind just went to like, well, wouldn't it be amazing if other Catholic homesteaders like all got together? So we had a conference. We some of the guys in my parish like, that is a good idea. We should put on a conference. And so we called a conference and said, hey, let's get everyone back together under the banner of the land movement. Let's not change a word. Let's just put what Shrove and Father Vincent McNabb put as the 7 motives and the 7 means back on a website, and call people to a conference around that stuff. And so we did. And within like 3 or 4 weeks, like 350 people had gotten tickets to this conference. And that was it was incredible. So we were just like blown out of the water. And there's like all these providential steps like throughout it, where like we were going to have it on my farm. And then I was like, oh, I can't have it on my farm, 350 people. I don't have the parking space for that. So then we live very, very close to the Auriesville Shrine, Our Lady of Martyrs, Auriesville Shrine, which is the site of the first North American martyrs. And so Isaac Jogues, Father Goupil. So these were the North American martyrs, and then this, like, from the blood of the martyrs rises the church. Like this. So we had the first, ended up having, they invited us there. We had the first conference there, actually. There's just like on and on and on. But then the movement started to grow from there. Like, people who attended that conference left inspired to bring the kind of ethos and work and social action rubrics of the land movement to their parishes, like you have done in your community, Liz. And so it just grew from there. Grew and it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then eventually it was like, wow, people wanted to give us money, and like help us do our program. And all of us who were there from the beginning were kind of looking at each other like, what this has grown into an organization. So then we formed a 501c3. I became the director of that 501c3, but for years, even after that, it was just like a part-time thing. It wasn't my job or anything. And then eventually the Vatican calls us to Rome, and we have that whole experience meeting the Pope and the dicasteries, and back to Rome a couple of times to like continue that dialogue. And then that kind of turned into a kind of well-formed organization now. And then people started to really give it some resources. Some real philanthropists showed up to really help us take the next step to the next level. And now we've grown to this network that you're familiar with, 91 chapters around the world. Any given month, there's dozens and dozens of events and new chapters forming. And I spend most of my days are like, executive level infrastructure of the organization, working on the business or mission, working on it. And then the other side is like working in it, where I'm doing leadership training and kind of helping people. Right before I was talking to you, I was redrafting the charter agreement that some of the chapters are going to sign for like level 2, phase 2 activities. So yeah, that's essentially the land movement. It's been an amazing ride. That's my story of like how it came up to me personally. I really feel like my contact with a land led me to a restoration of faith. And my contact with the land was kind of like a gift period in my life. It was a condition that didn't remain that long. I soon slipped back into having like to work a 9 to 5 job and everything else. But for a brief
Mhm.
period, I got given this incredibly powerful gift. And so part of my work with the land movement is really wanting to take the gift that I was given and figure out how to get people to discover that gift on their own and with their community, because it's really waiting there in the soil and in a relationship with God. And those two things are like waiting there for us all the time. And so I feel like this debt to my sisters and brothers in the land movement to be like, hey, let's wake up to these gifts
Mhm.
from our Lord, and then let's build and let's bring those gifts to more people. Let's open up more people to those gifts. And so that's that's my life. That's my work. I belong to the land movement now more than I belong to like any place or anything or
Uh-huh.
whatever else. The mission is really what drives me every day. My vocational role as a father and a husband too, but
Yeah.
the land movement is like a very motivating, orienting, amazing gift that's been kind of opened up in my life, and I have a real duty to it. So I find it very edifying spiritually and intellectually and socially. And I've met a ton like yourself, Liz, all these wonderful, beautiful people around the world that also like resonate with this stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That's
a long
yeah.
answer to a short
That's
question.
awesome. No, that's perfect because there's a lot of stuff in there that we can unpack a little bit of. I'm curious, just from a nosy perspective, how did the Vatican find out about you and how to connect with you at the beginning?
Oh yeah, so my local bishop was Bishop Scharfenberger of the Albany Diocese, and he had an ongoing dialogue with the Dicastery of Integral Human Development because they were working on like a kind of a format for diocesan programming, a little bit
Mhm.
more complicated than that because there are all kinds of like elements tied in. But he brought to Rome 2 years before I went, he brought to Rome a whole group that represented a whole bunch of different kind of either corporal works of mercy or kind of encountered, like unique encounters that were being facilitated through people's relationships with their dioceses and parishes, and then just their personal faith. And one of the things that in his presentation of this like program that Dicastery said back to him, we'd like to see a type of the program that he had presented was lacking in a particular like care for creation. It was Pope Francis's pontificate. So there's this
Mhm.
focus on care for creation, and so we came back and kind of looked in the diocese for somebody who was doing things related to care for the created world and the land. And well, there I was in the rural hinterlands and margins of his diocese. And so then out of the margins I came when he called on me to say,
Yeah.
hey, Mike, can you hear all these other programs? Can you integrate like a land movement presentation that is part of this whole thing when we go there? And then that kicked off an independent relationship with the dicasteries and elements of the curia and, papal household and other things,
Mm.
which we made like a direct appeal to Pope Francis. When we got to meet him, we got to meet Pope Francis eventually, and we gave him like a letter to say, Pope Francis, would you please kind of you don't like renew an apostolic blessing, but will you bring the apostolic blessing into the present for the contemporary land movement? And like right after we were able to have this meeting with him, not too soon after he passes away.
Mm. Mm.
And so then like another year goes by, and I open up my folder one day. We've done a lot of work. The chapters have grown. We've gotten bishops to support us, but I haven't really had any contact with the papal household since our visit. I did go back to meet with the dicastery, but I wasn't able to meet with the papal household when I was there. And I just opened my email one day. There's an email in my thing, and it says nothing but my name in the title. It's just my name in the title. There's nothing in the body of the email, and then it's just a letter from the Pope as an attachment.
Wow.
So, so that's how it came. That's how it. I was just like in my office.
That's a good day to wake up and do that, right?
Yeah. So I'm in my office, like gasping, and my coworkers in the other, room. So I was working at this point as like a project manager for a construction company, and my coworkers in the other room are like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I got a letter from the Pope." So it was a pretty awesome day, and then since that letter landed, and Pope Leo, if you're listening, thank you so much for that letter. But since that letter's landed, it's grown so much. This just when you get the Pope to write a nice letter about you, or when he chooses to do that, or God, the providence moves him to do that, it has an effect. So it's had a profound effect on people's acceptance of the mission, understanding of the organization, and like desire to kind of enact the rubrics of our organizing, which you, Liz, have been a big part of. You've seen, at least for the past like year and a half, I think, maybe even longer than that, you've seen the kind of growth of the land movement as we keep adding tools and keep adding, groups and the leadership chats and councils, and now this phase 2, move in the organization. And so, so you yourself have witnessed that growth over the last little bit, and it's been amazing to be part of for me.
Well, I've only been, I guess it's a year. I think we had our first meeting in July last year.
Okay.
Area. Believe it or not, it may seem long, but you're seeing all kinds of people. So yeah, and I'm curious about, you mentioned a little bit about the players from history back in the early 20th century. And for a while, the movement was sort of dormant because of the death of those people that were so involved before World War II. But evidently, it didn't completely die. And I guess the world couldn't smother out the historical fact that it existed, right, at some point in time. And that the idea of something like distributism is a real economical model that a country could use, from the grassroots on upward. But the one thing I was wondering about, with your knowledge of the history of the movement, is you said we're now at 91 chapters, which from a month ago when we had our last leadership meeting that you were, orchestrating, we were at 84.
Yeah.
So there's an incredible growth of chapter development by the week. I mean, even if it's 1 or 2 chapters a week, that's pretty amazing, because a year from now, that could be another 50 or 60 chapters or more possibly that hop on board across the world. How does this growth right now, or the way the movement stands right now in terms of the number of chapters, I don't know if it was developed that way back in the early 20th century, but assuming it's an apples to apples comparison, how is the growth now compared to what it was when it was in its heyday?
So I don't often say this because it sounds like it sounds prideful, or I don't know. I know it can be interpreted as prideful. We are way past anything that the original land associations, English land associations, got to in terms of the scope, reach, and events and that part of Catholic land movement. Now they had, so as far as like chapters, they had 6 is the answer. They had 6 land associations. Okay. We're way past that, and they had like maybe a handful of events each year in those 6. So media and communication didn't move in the same way back then. A lot of their focus was put into producing the Cross and Plow, which was a quarterly magazine that they put out, which was like a series of essays and articles and social commentary. They even had a section that's like akin to tweets. There's like the first like page is just like all these like different little aphorisms and like snippets of news and like really quick blasts of like info for the distributist, agrarian Catholic. So so the Cross and the Plow was a thing that they did that we don't really have. Your newsletter might be one of the closest things to the contemporary Cross and Plow. So we don't really have that side of it because we have a different media environment now, right? Information moves very quickly. The lateral communication. So a lot of like you hit it right on the head. The average growth is 2 chapters a week. That's like average. Sometimes it's much more. You went through the process. There's the discernment period. Sometimes people I don't go back to them once they're in their discernment period. They have to come back and like pursue us to really institute, get the chapter started. So sometimes we'll have like 2 week, 2 week, 2 week, 2 week, and then discernments. People I did orientation with and put out in discernment like months ago, like 5 of them will show up all on the same day, just like something in the air,
Right. Yeah, right.
So that happens sometimes. And then there's also, which we're going to get into actually in our next leadership council. There's some chapters that like historically existed when like kind of became a fellowship group and don't do much public programming anymore, but they have a strong fellowship group. And so there's all kinds of like different chapters and different manifests of like organization. And some chapters like came and went, like the people who were leading them moved away, and it's like we don't really have a leader. Tennessee is a great example of that, where Tennessee hasn't had, we lost the leader in Tennessee. We haven't had strong leadership. We had a list of like 100 people that were doing things, but then we lost the leadership there. Couldn't find it again. But now, and like years went by, I think 2 years went by, and now Tennessee has a very strong leader that just made his way through orientation, who will have his first event in October. And so that like Tennessee will come back. So there's chapters functioning at different levels, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And I don't know if you have an idea of, 91 chapters is pretty amazing. Do you have a sense of the number of people in total in all of those groups?
Yeah, we're I think I import like I manage the database. I think we're at like 11 or 12,000 people overall, like throughout the whole thing. I think that's about where we sit. But I think that's a very broad, like anybody who's contacted a chapter ever anywhere, not necessarily like how many people have showed up to maybe have shown up to a meeting. I think it's just reached out to chapters, or around 12,000. I would say that there's likely, hundreds of active participants, people who are like regular. How big is your chapter? Your chapter is actually like makes me feel like you're a good like standard model for what a chapter is. You have regular events. There's clearly fellowship in your group, like beyond those regular kind of public events. But there is a regularity and a leadership there that's present. And so like Dayton, Ohio is a very healthy chapter. So how many people would you say is?
I think our list is about 50 people, but there may be a blend of households in there. So maybe around 35 households, I would say.
Right. So that's and then of those 35 households, I bet you there's 5 families that are like there at every single event, or like really participating. And then there's, the rest of those households maybe float in or out, or show up and don't participate, they maybe participate, but don't participate in a higher level of organizing, or, so
Right.
that spectrum exists across the greater movement as well. But in comparison, back to your original question, in comparison to the original Catholic land movement, they had 2 components that we didn't have. They had what they called their organ of propaganda, in classic 1930 speech. Their organ of propaganda was the cross and the plow. And then the third component that we don't have yet is that they had what they called a demonstration farm. And in their manifest, it was a type of like secondary education spot. Like, so young men would finish like school, and when they finished school, they would apply to live at this place called Pryorwood Hall. And they would go through a year program essentially on like how to run a farm, how to run a small sustenance farm that had a market interface. And then they would take that skill, bring it, back to their community and teach other men how to do it in their community. and they would put on workshops. They were called landmen. They gave them a
Mm.
title. And so we don't, as of now, have a Briarwood Hall. So we have workshops, conferences, fellowship. I would say while we don't have a quarterly publication, there's quite a lot of like land movement media work that happens. So we have kind of like a modern equivalent of the media propaganda side of things is pretty good. But we don't have a site. We don't have that spot where people go to for a week-long training. And that's why I'm so excited about the West Virginia project, because I believe it'll become a model for other regional projects that mirror, just like the conferences became a model for chapter organizing.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that what's happening in West Virginia will become a model for regional demonstration farms and adjacent kind of residential community, development stuff. So I'm very excited about that. So everything looks a little different than it did in 1930. But the core things are still, the pattern of the organization is the same, as the circumstances have changed.
Sure. Well, they're going to have to,
Right.
because it's going to fit in a different culture altogether, let alone a whole different technological land, right? It's so different now than it used to be, and not among the Catholics so much, but a lot of the people in the world are not so much readers. They just look at video, and that's just what the world has kind of brought us into.
Right.
Which is one of the wonderful things about the land movement, is that it does encourage people to go back into time and to look and read at these different these different influential men that were provocative for their time, right? And they saw the handwriting on the wall and how difficult at that time the Industrial Revolution was, and what it would mean for society. And look at us now in a post-industrial era, at least in the USA, we could say that, or, post-industrial, and this weird kind of technocracy that's here. And it's not really that difficult to make the leap that something like the Catholic land movement has grown so exponentially, so quickly. You said 6 years ago was when you started to really put the pieces together with the Catholic land movement and move into that direction of leading the organization, right?
Yep. So yeah, no, the parallels between Pope Leo XIII's warning about industrialism and its consequences on our basic, natural law rights like private property and dignified labor and the structure of the family, and like those warnings from what he was witnessing, which was rapid industrialism in his time. There is an absolute perennial thread to the warnings from Pope Francis around what he calls the technocratic paradigm, and now our current Pope Leo XIV around what he also deems the technocratic paradigm. And so those parallels that you're speaking of are very present. And the thing is, the problems change. I think we say this somewhere in one of our videos. It's a great line though. The problems are always changing and evolving.
Mm-hmm.
The answers stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
Family, care for the created world, and love of the creator. Right? So the land movement's always going to have a place, because organizing those three things and creating a relational encounter between people that integrates those three things, a glorification of God, a love of community, and a stewardship of the land. That's always going to be a powerful answer, because that's the answer.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, like we stray and all these things, or we get pigeonholed in one little like corporal work of mercy that we're doing, or one policy change that we're trying to fight for. And these are all good causes, but what I love about the land movement is how integrative it is. You can have corporal works of mercy like through a chapter, but you're also dealing with like the order and structure of the family. So like somebody who's even like has a great prayer life, it's like, well, let's is your is your household productive? Have you introduced like productive habits into your household? Are you making cheese or sewing your clothes, or how can we come together as Catholics and help each other do that more, so we can step out of paradigms that degrade our essential dignity, strip us or dispossess us of property, or bring us into encounter with cultural patterns that are denigrating or deleterious on the family, right? So like that's the work, and it's very total. It's got this beautiful like totality to it, that I think a lot of nonprofits, profit focus or policy focus, kind of doesn't have that totality, where the land movement like has this totality to it that's kind of beautiful to partake in.
Well, so it's that fullness of the faith, right? You can act it out, so to speak, in all these aspects of your life, the way that you do things around your home, and if you're able to make your home economically productive. Not everybody can do that, but some people can. What a blessing that is, right? To be able to have that. So it just kind of shows you how God intended for us to be, and how we need to kind of move back into that direction. What would you say to somebody like a Catholic who would kind of balk at the idea, like, I don't really, this doesn't sound like my cup of tea. I don't want to have to live on a farm. Let's just say sometimes you run across people that say that. So what would your, not that you have to have a rebuttal necessarily, but would you have anything to say about that?
My challenge to everybody is that no matter, I just did this, one of my children was asking me, we were driving in the car, and they're like, Dad, do all the parts of the cars come from the earth? And I was like, yes, child, every part of a car, even though it's so complicated, it all finds its origins in the earth. Dad, does every part of the road come from the earth? Yes, child. Do the airplanes? Yes, child. Every single, so that's true from the way that we eat, to the clothes that we wear, to the houses that we live in, so in every material temporal relationship that's like that, reaches itself back to questions about how we, in the position that God placed us in, are caring for the created world. Right? There's a question there that each one of us can ask. For some people, they can drive that question to such a depth that they're like hand pumping water, splitting wood, and like slaughtering sheep on their property, because they're living in an intense closeness of stewardship with the created world, and they're finding that experience not just spiritually edifying, but materially grounding. Right? But there's other people who are far away from that. They're like in a box somewhere in the Upper West Side, or like they're in a slum somewhere in Chicago, or like whatever it is. They're distant from that created world. And my challenge to anybody who would say like, oh, this isn't for me, I think you gave the example of like somebody who their disposition is like, I don't want anything to do with that. Well, my answer to that particular person would be, you have something to do with it, and in that doing with, you have responsibility. And so what is a way that you can come closer to that responsibility? And it might look like, hey, I'm just going to go shop at the farmer's market, or hey, I'm just going to, prioritize, shopping secondhand for my clothes, or hey, I'm gonna disconnect from a mediated encounter of television or phones or whatever, and I'm gonna integrate a walk outside so I can at least witness God's created world. So there is something small that every single person can do. Even Carthusians, right? Carthusians, some of the most austere, they live in these tiny little cells, but they care, and they care for these tiny little gardens, not much bigger than my desk, of like bitter herbs, right? But through that contact with the created world, they craft and chisel their soul, their character, their habits, their virtues into people who are pleasing to God. And so each one of us have that opportunity, no matter how like meager our circumstances is, or how much we'd like to ignore it. That possibility is there, and the land movement is encouraging everybody, like, hey, take one step closer. yeah, maybe you're not going to be raising sheep and butchering them on some, farm somewhere in Missouri or something. But I bet you there's something in each one of our lives where we could create a deeper contact that integrates land, the created world, community, and God. I bet each and every one of us can figure out a way to deepen our relationship with those three things. And that's what the land movement's asking people to consider and then act on.
And what would the harm be, right? I mean, wouldn't you want to just do that anyway? Right. It just seems like it's so utterly natural. It's rebellious against the culture right now. That's what I love about it, that rebelliousness, because when you talked about, 6 years ago was the height of the pandemic, as I like to refer to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to me a stretch of the imagination that out of that very ugly time, a rebirth took place, and there was, some people who got together and decided, we need to reinvigorate this movement, because look at what the alternative is going to be. And it's not to say that if you're not part of it, you're going to be wearing masks and social distancing. However, it shows you the philosophical shift of how bizarre we can be, so separated to the point that we live next door to a neighbor but never talk to somebody, and we even mask ourselves because we're being told to do that, so to me, the movement really, like that, I think that's God's hand on the culture. Like, he's always in charge. There's always going to be somebody out there that will respond to his grace, right? His discerning, like, this is the thing that I have to do. So it's a gift, that you took that, and like, why am I saying Hail Marys while I'm planting a tree? Right? Who would do that? Who's not somehow being motivated by the Holy Spirit himself, right?
Right.
So
right.
I mean, that whole thing is such a neat story. I didn't know that about you. I thought that's kind of fun, But in the height of this weird era of, technocratic overlordship, right, on our country, and it's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're gonna go more natural,
Yeah. I think that period, that period in COVID, it did a couple things. One, for the people who were kind of following along and saw the various inconsistencies or troubling nature of what you've described as, like, technocratic overreach. I think it evoked in them a pursuit of, like, well, if all that stuff that they're telling me isn't real, well, then what's real? Right? And that as soon as you start entering the contemplative state of what is truth, what is true, let me pursue truth, right? Well, St. Thomas Aquinas, like, smiles from heaven because that right reason is going to take you someplace, and it's going to be the arms of our Lord if you follow it all the way. And so there was that. I think that happened to a lot of people. And then I think also at the same time there was a material dependency that got challenged. People kind of got, like, worried about supply chains, and they got worried about, like, where their food was coming from, and if the lights are going to stay on, and, like, and so that hint of, like, wow, this whole technocratic paradigm that we find ourselves trapped in is actually quite fragile. And so what does it look like if we were to invest in resilient systems that would actually take care of people and take care of each other and take care of myself? Like, what do those look like? And in the pursuit of that, I think you find a very kind of distributist social philosophy is kind of revealed of people in localities, producing things locally, having productive households, having those productive households in support of one another. And this can all be done not necessarily out of, like, a fear of material or want, but all of that can actually be organized through a love of the Creator and the world that He's given us to steward. And so that switch, this opportunity to kind of embrace all this stuff that the land movement offers, is to say, hey, like you can do all this stuff to glorify God, and that's your purpose. right? You can raise animals and plant trees and pray and work and pray all day long, and you can do that in a way to glorify God, not to be trapped in a type of like prepper, fear-driven mindset, but you can do all this stuff to glorify God, and that just flips the whole thing. Like all of a sudden, all this stuff like opens up that well of love that exists in all of us that can really be transformative both for the person and for the world and the people around them. So and that's kind of like that, evoking that is what the land movement's all about.
That's a very powerful message, because it is very easy to fall into a very scared mindset, because you don't know, am I being watched, right? Is this going to happen? Are we going to lose the value of the dollars going down? Oh no, what if the grocery stores close? So this is a movement that is really, important right now, because there is a lot of fear out there for people. And that's a good message, especially for Catholics to hear, that you don't have to buy into that, right? Fear is not something God wants us to be in a state of, except if we're in awe of him or something. Right? That the healthy fear that you love him and you don't want to hurt him or make him disappointed in you, right? So that that kind of leads me to ask about things that the movement is doing at large for chapters or individual Catholics that are maybe looking into it. Somebody might watch this video who's not part of our chapter or even part of your chapter, but they might just be kind of floating out there in the ether. What kinds of things could somebody do to help get themselves acquainted with the Catholic land movement?
Yeah, the first thing to do would be to go to the website and to see where the closest chapter organizing is happening to you. So where are there events local to you? Is there a leader that's in some state of cultivation or development near you? And how can you aid that effort? So that's all of these tools, the phones, this encounter between me and you, through computers, all of this must serve real relational embodied encounter in place, where that integration of land, community, and God can happen, where we can actually touch the soil, touch one another, and touch our Lord. That's, unless you have that embodied encounter, we're not going to get anywhere. So we have to first off view all the media and all the other stuff as tools to get to that. And so that's the goal. So all of us as leaders and other people should be, our first answer to this question of like what somebody should do with the land movement, get involved where you are locally with what's going on. And there's going to be a spectrum of activity. You might find after watching this video, if you're new to the land movement, there might be a chapter like right next to you, and you might want to go there and say, hey, I'd love to help plan the next event. Let's make sure there's an event for September, so that's number one.
And that's the kind of member we want, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because we all need help. It's hard to keep them going all the time. So that's number one. Number two, hopefully through that, real encounter and a restoration of realness in the movement, people are driven to a pursuit of the principles that animate the movement. So the land movement is built on a mountain of principles and history that reaches all the way to Catholic social doctrine, and then to even like the theology and our Lord's teachings. And so understanding that. So that would be the second thing I would encourage people to do, is like go research the land movement, read some articles about us, watch the videos, find the old literature, like Father Vincent McNabb, Social Chaos, Nazareth or Social Chaos, is one of the most important books, I think, in like that essay, Nazareth or Social Chaos, is just like an incredibly beautiful essay. But you just flip through it, the rights of private property, are we just living capital, overproduction or underconsumption, right? These are all like the themes of these essays, even though they're from the 1930s, are so relevant to our lives. So understanding that mountain, the mountain of like intellectual patrimony from which the land movement arises from, can really help clear a mind that's been TikTok, Facebook scrambled, like the toxic polarization and binary of American politics, and the constant fear media cycle, and the focus on just all these things. Uh, there's a well of intellectual life that's offered by the church and offered by the foundational like social philosophy that guides the land movement that's quite beautiful and is quite clarifying. So that would be my next thing is come into contact with some of that stuff because it's going to lead you to action. You have to have a good set of principles is going to keep you well oriented on your path of goal acquisition. If the pursuit is to the beatific vision, right, this is a great place to kind of like get your bearings about what our role as the laity are, what our role with the created world is, what our role to the civic execution of justice is, like all of these things are concepts that, what is the common good and what is a subsidiarity, solidarity, and human dignity. Our church has spoken to us now for hundreds of years, particularly in the modern period, through social encyclicals. Read those. So that would be my second thing: is come into contact with the intellectual life of the land movement. That's a beautiful part of it as well. And then pray for us, pray for people around you, and then sign up for $5 a month on our website and help us have the means as an organization to tackle this stuff full time. I think I just became full time with the land movement maybe 4 months ago now. And it's been absolutely transformational for the amount of benchmarks the land movement can now like get through, because I'm just like at this desk, 8 hours a day, really putting all my work, my professional talent and skill. But there needs to be like 5 of me. There needs to be 10 of me. There needs to be 100 of me, and that takes resources. And so for the price of a cup of coffee or something, this is my executive director pitch to keep the show. We got to throw coal in the engine to make the train run. And so if you come into witness an encounter of the land movement in your locality, if you then turn yourself to the intellectual life and find it edifying and like, oh wow, this is so beautiful, right? Again, $5, $10, $20 a month is actually really transformational. It's those monthly donations that build a budget that we can then hire staff on, right? We don't want to hire staff unless we have a kind of like guaranteed monthly pace to our finances. And that monthly pace comes from people making that $5, $10, $20 commitment. So if you have the means to do that, this stuff is something that you come to believe in, make that gift to the land movement. It really does move the needle. So that would be all the ways I would suggest. Oh, and come to the national conference. That would be that's my final one. Come to the national conference. You'll really the national conference in Indiana for people who have been. You've been, right, Liz?
Yeah.
So it's just this. It's like an amazing, it's an amazing 3 days. There's tons of great speakers. It's super affordable. It's $50 for like the whole weekend, and that includes the camping. And you can you just have this it's the largest gathering of Catholic agrarians in the world. And so we get together for 3 days. There's prayer, there's liturgy, there's workshops. I think there's over 25 workshops. We're just working on workshop stuff today for the national conference. There's over 25 workshops this year. Great, international, kind of internationally renowned speakers. Dale Alquist, Jason Craig, for people who know those names, will be the keynotes this year. It's just and then the fellowship, just people together for 3 days from all around the world, really coming together to be the type of tip of the spear of Catholic agrarianism. It's just a really awesome thing to be part of. So I encourage everyone to consider coming to the national conference this year out in Greensburg, Indiana, August 28th, 29th, and 30th.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, I think, for anybody in our neck of the woods. We're Southwest Ohio. It's literally an hour and a half from where I live. It was easy driving.
Nice.
Going home up to Cleveland is longer. That's 3.5 hours, for me to get up there. But it was a no-brainer to do that. Are there any particular classes or sessions at the conference that have you excited this year?
Yeah, so there's a trade school, San Damiano from Illinois. They're going to come and do a timber framing demonstration. So last year, if you were there last year, there were like a portable lumber mill that did a demonstration of like how to. So now that portable lumber mill is going to coordinate, and they're actually going to go from, you know, like they're going to mill things that can then be timber framed into a little thing.
Wow.
So we're going to show that process. Part of, I talked a little bit about the West Virginia project, but you know, timber framing using kind of classical building techniques and traditional building techniques that are kind of available to the common person is going to be part of what's going to make rural property accessible to people. And so part of what the land movement wants to do is like really teach people, you know, here's how you timber frame, here's how you do basic brick masonry, here's how you do, and some of these skills are going to be taught at this year's conference, as well as the stuff we always teach you. There'll be a pig, you know, a big pig roast and a full pig processing that people can take part in. There'll be the cheese making and the, you know, the dairy cow workshop and the, you know, so on and so forth. There'll be all that stuff too. The classic kind of land movement fair. But yeah, there's quite a few, and then there's some intellectual highlights, I think, like throughout it too. It's land movement conferences are like this great mix of practical skills, like, you know, learn about tinsmithing, you know, and then like learn about, you know, quadragesimo anno and subsidiarity, you know, like you can jump back and forth, which is, again, it's just the land movement thing. The land movement just like integrates things all the time. So you like hop from a workshop on some like deep Catholic theological topic, and then like hop right into how to, you know, sew the knees and the crotch of an old set of pants, you know, like that juxtaposition is pretty awesome. There's not many places where that happens, and it's fun to be part of.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so good. I'm very excited. So we have to get ourselves registered in this household. I'm just trying to collect who's coming, you know.
I get it. Yeah.
Trying to get them all to come. It'll be good. So tell me this. This will be the last thing I'll ask you, and then we can call it a day. But obviously, there's got to be some vision for what's coming up in the next, you know, 2, 3, 5 years. What do you see is happening with the land movement? And you know, for those who don't know about the structure of, you know, the hierarchy of the movement itself, how much do you yourself have in terms of a say over where things are going to be going in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
Yep. So those two questions. So what's going to happen, and then how much am I participating in it? So for me, over the next year, there's like 3 major things that are happening with the land movement that I'm really, really excited about. The first one being is that we've now opened up the legal format to allow the local chapters to operate under a charter, which allows them to open up bank accounts and begin local organizing and fundraising for localized infrastructure projects that are going to benefit those local communities. And for me, I don't necessarily think the leadership, everybody in leadership has realized how powerful that is. I think when we start launching things like, hey, we were able through, you know, joint fundraising to help this young family buy a Jersey cow and erect a barn, right? People are going to see that and say, well, wait a second, this, or we were able to buy a mobile butchery unit for the chapter that they can now use throughout all these different homesteads.
Wow.
People are going to start to realize, because there are people with gifts out there who want to see those gifts going to organized, productive, you know, well executed local projects. And so I think when that starts getting put together and people start seeing, I think that that's going to really have legs. So I'm very excited. I think it's already happening. There's been a couple chapters who have already utilized the structure. Oklahoma raised like $10,000 for an events tent, like overnight. And so I think that we're going to see that more. The other chapter in Ohio, I'm just talking with them right prior to this meeting, opened up an email where they're getting ready to sign the phase 2 stuff, the Northeast Western Reserve chapter.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I'm really excited about. Number 2 that I'm really excited about is the West Virginia project, because the West Virginia project is going to be a model for what the resurrection of Catholic land movement demonstration farms look like. and it's very exciting. We were again successful in raising money and finding land. And so there'll be this, like, demonstration farm that'll have like a little liturgical spot. There'll be some room for interns, and then there'll be 5 residential houses, and then a big farm complex that will be a productive market interfacing farm. But the whole grounds are mostly going to be there to kind of provide for the needs of the 5 families there. And so I am actually going to be one of those families that goes there and help run that demonstration farm. So it's a huge change in my life and taking my whole life in like a new direction that I wasn't.
So wait a minute, are you moving over there?
Yeah, I'm going to move to West Virginia.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So and what's happening is that increasingly more and more people, after they're seeing the productive association of the land movement in a place like a chapter like yours, people are coming and saying, hey, I'm 88 years old and I don't have children, but I have an old farm and I'd like to make the land movement the recipient of this farm. Could you do that? And once the West Virginia project kind of really gets legs, and we're not only are going to say, yes, we do that. Yes, we have a legal structure that can accept real property, but also here it is. Why don't you come take a look at this project in West Virginia? This is what we're going to do if you gift us a 200-acre farm in Oklahoma, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, whatever. There's a plan. There's a rubric to put that to productive use. And then finally, in between now and when the project reaches completion, one of the fronts that land movement kind of expands on is my ability to go and do face-to-face with chapter leads. And so I've been doing that 1 week at a time. I've been doing that 1 week every month. I usually fly out somewhere and like do a public speaking event and like do it. That if with 91 chapters, 1 chapter, 1 month at a time, well, we're like a decade before I get to everybody. So in order to move the marker on the land movement, me and my family are going to live in an RV and we're going to cross the entire country and visit every single chapter in America over the next year. And
wow, that's pretty fun.
For me, that's the next. I don't know. We got 2 teenagers and an 8-month-old, so I might need prayers. It's definitely going to be fun, but I think there's going to be some challenging. There's 6 kids, so it's going to be tight and challenging. But I think it's right. I think it's right for the children to witness this type of commitment to mission. So So that's another exciting part. That's going to build the foundation of a network. We very much want to profile farms throughout the Catholic land movement. And give people a potential, like the land movement kind of being a broker to negotiate long-term farm stays on farms. And so people have asked us for like an internship program for a really long time. And so the only way to do that is to get out into the field and profile farms. And so we're going to spend a year in the field meeting chapter leads, helping people, doing public speaking events, meeting with chancery offices, and then meeting Catholic homesteads and farms and trying to set up the foundation for later when we get back to West Virginia, setting up a type of internship program or farm stay program. That was a component of the original land movement that we don't execute right now. So I'd like to see that resurrected too. So so that's the next year. The next year for land movement is actually going to be like meeting the Pope was pretty bonkers that I got to shake the Pope's hand, but I kind of feel like this next year is going to be even more kind of wild for the land movement in terms of like our growth and our commitment to mission and our demonstrated action, and it's going to take the work and prayers of everybody involved in the network to make it happen. So I'll probably be reaching out to you at some point saying, hey Liz, we're going to be in Ohio during this week, set us up if you got a meeting, somebody we should meet. So that's forthcoming. So those are the 3 things I'm really excited about: phase 2 fundraising, localized fundraising for chapters, the West Virginia project, and the year tour, setting up strengthening the network, converting the network into phase 2 operation for chapters. I'm really excited about all that.
That's awesome. Well, the Cincinnati lead, Elizabeth, and I have submitted our letter and an email to the Archdiocese of Cincinnati here, awesome. Preceded by a phone call to the direct secretary to the Archbishop. So she said, give him at least a week. I'm like, well, I wasn't expecting anything anything, short at all. But so I'm very hopeful that we'll get some kind of response, and I will keep you posted of that, because that'll be the 8th then, if we can get a support letter or something.
Yeah,
that'll be awesome. So I'm excited about that. So then, do you think that you're basically, are you calling the shots with the goal setting for the organization at large, or is the whole body of directors, board of directors, doing that together?
No, it's the board of directors mostly. So
Mhm.
everything gets brought to the board of directors. I mean, I'm in my little lab and office here, talking with people all the time, and working organizational partnerships, and
Yeah.
definitely involved in strategic planning and visioning for the organization in a very intimate way. But ultimately, those decisions are made by the board, and so especially like big kind of directions like the West Virginia thing or phase 2 stuff. These are all things that have been really, really well vetted and chewed and digested by the board. And so the leadership council is always a space. I always try and leave, for our quarterly leadership councils, for leaders who are listening here. If you have ideas or projects that you want to see push forward in the land movement, outside of a chapter role, there is always the opportunity through the leadership council to create a joint committee to say, hey, I want to create a joint committee around reproducing the cross and the plow, or I want to create a joint committee around, creating a program or a rubric for corporal works of mercy in a chapter, or I want to create a prayer book for the land movement. Anybody want to jump in a joint committee? I always encourage, that you've been to our meetings. I always leave the agenda open and just let it roll for as long as people want. I'd love to see more joint committee work going on between leaders. I think you do a great job with the newsletter, but you could say, the idea that newsletter could be something that is reproduced in all the chapters, that it could be, you're already kind of doing it by giving them a template, but I think more thinking like that, more joint committee thinking of how is what I'm doing that's working in my locality, is that actually a rubric or a technique that the whole movement could utilize, or this strategic goal that I'm setting for my chapter, could this be something that the whole movement should do? The writing the letter to the bishop is a great example. Like a handful of chapters did it, and then all of a sudden, now the whole network's doing it. Very, very powerful. So more of that. I think strategic goal setting by the leadership council, and then forming joint committees around action. That's the structure of the land. That was the old structure of the land movement. That's how they worked. So I want to keep seeing that happen. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So where would you direct people? The website for the Catholic Land Movement? Anybody looking for more details?
Yep. I just really explore the website. The website is very trim, and it's supposed to be like that. The website is going to give you a list of books, and the website is going to give you a list of chapter leaders that you can reach out to. And then it's going to give you a video or two, and that's it. And that is people are always like, we need more on the website. It's very intentful that the website is very, very trim, because we want you to have a real book in your hand. We want you to have a real conversation with the people next to you. We want you to get out and get into real encounter and relationship with the earth, with your community, and with God. And so that's what the website's doing by being so slim, kind of, where there's a lot going on there. We get a lot of hits every day, but we keep it very, very trim, so people are guided right to action or to principles, and we go from there.
Yeah, that's quite wise. Well, Mike Giudice, thank you so much for your insights, your time, and all that you're doing for the Catholic Land Movement and just Catholicism in general, because I think this is a very historical group that hundreds of years from now is going to have its impact, and we're just seeing a little bit of it right now.
Awesome. Well, I hope so. So much. So thank you so much for having doing an interview with me, Liz. It's always great. I really enjoy our moments of connection. So thanks so much for creating the space for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, take care and enjoy your day. Yeah.
Yeah, you too. God bless. Do you want to end in a prayer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great idea. Yeah.
All right. In nomine Patris et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri, Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Amen.
In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.